I am going to get us started here so that we can have a lot of time for our presentation. I'm going to start with a few announcements, and let me just add a spotlight here to make this easier. So if you're just joining us, I want to let you know that we have a Facebook group that you can connect with members in between events. If you just go to Facebook and you search WordPress accessibility, the group will come up. It's a good place to ask questions, share ideas, get feedback on things you're working on. And so please join us in between if you're on Facebook. People always ask, is this meetup being recorded? Yes, it is being recorded. A recording will be available. It usually takes us about 2 weeks. I think we're a little delayed on our last recording because of Thanksgiving. But after the event, we cut out sort of the beginning and the end as needed, and then we get a corrected captions file and full transcript, and it will be available on our website. The easiest way to find recordings, if you're looking for one, is to go to equalizedigital.com/meetup. You can also join our email list. In theory, if I did things right, you will get a prompt that says, "Thank you for joining" in your browser after attending the meetup. And you can join our email list there, or Paula added the link in the chat. It's just equalizedigital.com/focus-state. And we send about 2 emails a month generally. I know Black Friday was a little bit crazy for everyone's email list. But they have the links to the recaps, and they have information about upcoming events. And then they also have some links to news related to web accessibility around the internet. So please join that. This meetup has some sponsors. I'll introduce them in just a little bit. And we are continuing to look for sponsors for 2023. We rely on sponsors to help us cover the cost of live captioning. And if we are able to get some, we would love to go back to having sign language interpretation as well. If you or your company would be interested in sponsoring, please reach out to us. You can reach out to us at meetup@equalizedigital.com, and that'll go to Paula and myself, and then we can send you over all of the information. If you have any other needs related to the meetup, or you have any questions or need anything else, or have ideas or would be interested in speaking next year, because we are booking speakers, I think, for the end of Q1 next year and Q2 right now, please reach out to us at that email as well. I am Amber Hines. If you haven't met me before, I'm the CEO of a company called Equalize Digital. We are the lead organizer of the WordPress Accessibility Meetup, and we focus in WordPress accessibility. We have a plugin called Accessibility Checker. There's a free version available. And we started this meetup mostly because we wanted more opportunities to learn. This is sort of, I say it's like my private tutoring sessions that I get to have with all of our phenomenal speakers. So that's a little bit who we are. If you want to learn more about my company, you can go to equalizedigital.com. We're on Twitter at Equalize Digital, and I'm on Twitter as well. As long as it lasts. We'll see how long it lasts. I might have to change these slides up and be like, we're on Mastodon or somewhere else. I don't know, but we're on Twitter right now. We have 2 sponsors today that I want to thank. The first one is Accessicart. Accessicart is our live caption sponsor for today. So they are covering the cost of the live captions. They specialize in making e-commerce and WooCommerce websites accessible. They can come in and do customized assessments, consulting, and strategy sessions for e-commerce websites, and will help with your processes, providing audits, and helping to prioritize the game plan for making fixes to make the store accessible. So if you are interested in learning more about Accessicart, you can find them at, I'm going to spell it out, ACCESSICART.com, accessicart.com. They're also on Twitter, as long as it lasts. at Accessicart. We always like to encourage people to thank our sponsors, send them a tweet, say thank you for sponsoring. It helps them know that it's important and encourages them to want to do it again. So if you are on Twitter and you are willing to do that, we appreciate that. And then we have our transcript and SRT caption file sponsor is Empire Caption Solutions. They do a ton of things beyond captioning. They do live captioning, they do audio description, they do sign language interpretation. They are a phenomenal company to work with. They've been donating their services for the meetup to us, and then we actually ended up hiring them for the WordPress Accessibility Day conference, and they did a really great job. So I highly recommend them, and you can learn more about them at empire.captions.com, and they're at Empire Caption on Twitter. We have 3 upcoming events that I want to tell you about. The first one is our next meetup will be on Monday, December 19th at 7 p.m. I know a lot of kids will be out of school and it's getting close to the holiday, but we will still have our normal meetup later this month. And Alex Stein will be joining me, and he and I will be doing a live audit of the Underrepresented in Tech website to give feedback to the founders of that website, Michelle Frechette and Allie Nimmons. We're super excited about it. And then next month in January 2023 already, we will have how to counter arguments from developers and designers with Anne Beauvalette. And that will be Thursday, January 5th at 10 a.m. Central Time. And then Joel Snyder will be talking about audio descriptions, what those are, and how to create them for media, web, and other live events. And that will be on Monday, January 16th at 7 p.m. Central Time. So I am very excited to introduce our speaker for today, Ryan Bracey. Ryan is the Director of Web Development and User Experience at Second Melody, which is a branding firm in New Jersey. And they build websites for clients of all sizes across a variety of different industries. I think actually Ryan, Second Melody has also sponsored in the past, which we very much appreciate that they've been a sponsor of the meetup as well. And I know that you've done a lot to try and bring more clients into accessibility and realize that it's important. And so we're really looking forward to hear how you have approached that. So thank you.
Of course, I'm excited to share.
All right, so I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll hide myself so you can start sharing. We do have a Q&A widget, so it's a little bit helpful for us if you can put questions in the Q&A widget, and then you can use the chat if you just want to have side conversations or other comments. Ryan, do you have a preference? I forgot to ask you this on, do you want to take all the questions at the end, or do you want me to pop in if I see some?
Yeah, feel free to pop in. The format of this presentation I'm giving is one I share with clients, and when I give it live to a client, we have a lot of interaction. So it's kind of natural for me to get questions throughout. So yes, please pop in.
All right, well, take it away.
All right, thank you, Amber. Okay. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about selling your clients on accessibility. So when I say selling, I kind of more mean education. So what happens is, well, ensuring our websites are accessible should just be an integral part of every website build process, not only because it benefits users living with disabilities, but just because it generally improves the site experience for every user. Not to mention, it's just simply the right thing to do. We should be doing it. Unfortunately, these reasons alone aren't always enough for a client, since accessibility requires an investment of time on our part. It requires an investment of money on the client's part, and many clients might not think that this investment is worth it for them. The reason I say selling through education is because we don't really give our clients a chance to opt out of accessibility best practices when we do work for them. Rather, we use this conversation to educate them on what accessibility is, what success looks like, and just help them better understand why we make some of the decisions we make, how come some things take a little bit more time than other things. This comes up a lot when we end up getting brand guidelines from a client where maybe they've been using yellow text on a white background, and we have to all of a sudden say, hey, we know this is an integral part of your brand, but we can't do this. This is why. So what I'm going to do is share with all of you the presentation we actually give to our clients, just to help start the conversation with them on what accessibility is. I know many of you on this call are pretty well versed in accessibility already, so I just want to note at the top that this presentation is meant for people who are really new to it. So a lot of the concepts have been generalized or simplified in a way that is a little more intentional for that audience that's receiving the presentation to not get too far in the weeds with them. So from this point forward, I'm going to switch over to the presentation I actually give. So I'll now be talking to you all as if you were a client just learning about accessibility for the first time. So this is our presentation on accessibility. I have this picture of Mr. Rogers over here on the right, because I really like to share an anecdote I heard with him a few years ago that really kind of resonated with me. When I first started my journey into accessibility, I came across this story where he had received a letter from a young girl who watched his show saying, "Dear Mr. Rogers, please say when you are feeding your fish because I worry about them. I can't see that you are feeding them, so please say you are feeding them out loud. Katie, age 5. Her dad then added a note to the bottom of that letter saying, Katie is blind and she does cry if you don't say that you have fed the fish. From that point on, I'm sure many of us on this call probably grew up with Mr. Rogers. If you remember at the end of every episode, he would go over and feed his fish and say, I'm now going to feed my fish. Some of our watchers or viewers get worried if I don't always feed the fish. And then he sprinkles the food into the fish tank while a flute sound plays. So this was all done to make that kind of seem more accessible for people who are vision impaired because of this one letter he received from a fan. So I like to bring this up at the top of my presentation just to kind of set that mood that while we are talking about web accessibility, which is something that is rather new, we've only really had the web for the past 25-ish years, accessibility as a whole has been around for a very long time. It is something people have been fighting for a long time. And I just want to get us in that mindset that what we're talking about, while in context to web, is very new, and the context to humanity has been around for a long time and has been important for a long time. So also, hi, my name is Ryan Bracey. I am the Director of Web Development and User Experience at Second Melody. So in my presentation, we're going to go through 4 sections. I'm going to start with an overview, what accessibility looks like in practice, how we measure success, and then I'm just going to wrap everything up at the end. So to start with the overview, I'm going to start by just generally introducing accessibility. I'm then going to talk a little bit about the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then I'm going to finish out by talking a little bit on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So accessibility, or A11Y, is essential to making sure every user visiting your site can access its content. I have a quote over here too that says, if you want people to access your content, then you want people with disabilities to access your content. Finito. This is by Renee Wan, Swiss accessibility consultant, activist, and evangelist. I do also want to note this little abbreviation here, A11Y. When we talk about accessibility on the internet and within technology, we use this acronym because it makes it a lot easier to write or talk about accessibility. It also helps if you're searching. If you search A11Y, you know you're getting results that are relevant to what you're looking for. Also helps save characters when you're making social media posts. So I always like to start too by just opening up to the group and asking, what do you all think we mean when we say a website should be accessible? It's at this point where our clients will usually say something like, colors need to have proper contrast. Or we might get someone who's like, well, I've heard the word, but I don't really know anything else. Or anywhere up to screen readers need to be able to see the website, or someone might even surprise us and say, we have to have WCAG compliance. So we get a variety of answers here. And then I move on to, well, what do we actually mean when we say a website should be accessible? What are we talking about? And what we mean when we say it is literally that everybody should be able to access your website. We do this by ensuring that the website's content is available to everybody and that the website's functionality can be operated by everyone. To make sure we're succeeding at these things, we have to start to consider the way people use our website, access that content. So to do this, we have to break some assumptions. A typical user, and I'll air quote that for now, experiences the internet by using a point and click interface, such as a mouse or a touchpad. We often think of ourselves as the typical user, but when we do this, we're making a lot of assumptions about our users. So when we make that assumption, we assume our users are equal in language ability, they are equal to us in technical literacy, they have an equal physical ability, they are equal to us in financial status, they have an equal amount of time, or that they have a similar social support. So when we use ourselves as the baseline, we end up excluding everyone whose experience differs from our own. And what we're really trying to do here is avoid that exclusion. So when it comes to people, there is no such thing as typical, which is why I had it in quotes. If we assume that all users can see and use technology in the same way we do, what ends up happening is we'll create something that might be easy to use for some people, but it is difficult or even impossible to use for everyone else. So when we say accessible, what we're really talking about here is users that fall outside of that typical range. These users access or experience things differently from that of a typical user. More often than not, this is referring to users who are experiencing some type of impairment or disability. And then I have a quote on this slide that says, "The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect." And that was said by Tim Berners-Lee, the W3C director and inventor of the World Wide Web. So now that we've talked a little bit about the concept of accessibility, introduced to that a little bit, let's take a look at its legal necessity. So the Americans with Disability Act of 1990, or the ADA, is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on disability. So far in 2022, over 2,000 federal digital accessibility lawsuits have been filed under the ADA. This is a stat from accessibility.com. So the ADA, as it applies to the web, gets a little murky. So the Department of Justice has long held that the ADA applies to websites and other digital services. And even in March of this year, March of 2022, they published a set of guidelines describing how state and local governments, as well as businesses, can ensure their websites are accessible. Despite these affirmations, the Department of Justice, though, has not published any regulations for what standards websites should be held to or how they should be enforced. And this complicates things in court a little bit. So since the web accessibility is not explicitly mentioned in any federal law, courts are kind of left on their own to interpret the ADA. Oftentimes, courts will look to Title III of the ADA specifically. Title III states in its fullness, "No individual shall be discriminated against on the basis of disability in the full and equal enjoyment of the goods, services, facilities, privileges, advantages, or accommodations of any place of public accommodation by any person who owns, leases, or leases to, or operates a place of public accommodation." I know that's a lot of legalese, so to break it down, it's basically saying that Title III of the ADA forbids public accommodations from discriminating against disabled Americans. That mention of public accommodations in there, it's very important, since this is what plaintiffs often look to when they argue that a website counts as a public accommodation, when they argue that it's covered under the ADA. Unfortunately, there is no definition of public accommodation within the ADA, so this definition is left open to the courts, who are somewhat divided on that on a case-to-case basis. There is, however, precedent for web accessibility under the ADA. In 2019, probably one of the most prominent cases or famous cases of accessibility was Robles versus Domino's Pizza. It was a case where a blind man named Guillermo Robles filed a suit against Domino's, alleging that the website and mobile app were not compatible with his screen reader, which made it impossible for him to order pizza. His case was originally dismissed by the Central District of California. He later appealed, brought it to the US Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, who ruled that the ADA does protect access not just to brick and mortar public accommodations, but also to the websites and apps. Domino's in turn appealed this to the Supreme Court. In October of 2019, the Supreme Court declined to resolve this circuit split. So that Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling stands today, and it's kind of set a precedent that's been used by many courts across the country, that the ADA does apply to websites. It hasn't really done much to address the ambiguity of the ADA's application to web accessibility, though, other than set this precedent. So, Ryan, I'm confused, is probably you right now what you're thinking. And I know it's a lot. I just would like you to imagine how frustrating this must be for people living with disabilities. The big takeaway here should be that accessibility is not just a suggestion. It's not just an add-on service. The ADA, which, as I mentioned, does have precedent to apply to websites, it is a real civil rights law. When this law is not met, it does hold real legal consequences. And thankfully, there is some work being done today to extend the ADA definition to explicitly cover websites. There is a bill currently on the floor that was introduced to Congress in October of 2022 by Senator Tammy Duckworth. It is called the Websites and Software Applications Accessibility Act. If this bill does pass, it would build upon the ADA and start setting out some clear regulations for digital accessibility and requirements. I am very excited for this bill. I hope it does go through. Some of the big takeaways of it, I have the bill linked in my presentation too, that it can be read in its entirety, but some of the big takeaways are that it would require the Department of Justice and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to set, enforce, and periodically update standards for websites and applications. It would also require entities to adhere to those standards, which would mean businesses' websites and applications would need to be accessible. One of the things I think is the coolest in it is it lays out that these regulations would have to be updated every 3 years, which 3 years is very, very quick for a government to do anything. So this would allow them to be super nimble and really keep up with advances in technology as they came out. So now that was a lot, but now that we understand a little bit about what accessibility is, how the law kind of looks at accessibility, I want to talk about how we go about making sure our websites are accessible. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, is a standard for web content accessibility. I have a quote over here that says, "Technology doesn't make accessibility hard. People who don't care do." This is a quote by Sherry Byrne-Haber, who is a CPACC certified, which stands for Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies. What WCAG is a set of guidelines that get maintained by the World Wide Web Consortium. It covers a wide range of recommendations for making web content more accessible. They define web content as information, which is inclusive of text, images, and sounds, and structure, which it covers the code or markup that actually builds the site. The way we use WCAG is basically they provide a set of referenceable technical standards. They organize these standards into 4 main principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Each one of these principles contains a set of about 12 to 13 guidelines. Each one of these guidelines has their own testable success criteria. Those criteria are even further broken down into 3 levels: A, AA, and AAA. We'll get into specifics on this later, so don't worry about it right now. I also want to really emphasize that ensuring your web content meets the outlined success criteria is really just the first step in assuring the creation of accessible websites. So to kind of pull it back to what we were talking about with the ADA, is WCAG a legal requirement? Does this actually satisfy that legal need to be accessible? If it wasn't confusing enough whether this was a legal requirement or not, I'll confuse it a little bit more here. So for federal agencies, yes, WCAG is a legal requirement. In 2017, Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 got revised to require all federal agencies and contractors must comply with WCAG. If you're a private business, though, kind of. Under the ADA, websites are required to be accessible. However, non-compliance with WCAG is not a violation of the ADA. So while it's not actually the standard set out that we have to follow for conformance, many states and courts do uphold that WCAG compliance provides reasonable accessibility. So while it's not required, it does help us cover our bases. I know this is very US centric. There are a lot of other countries that have much more defined regulations surrounding accessibility, and most of them do cite the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as conformance. So all signs really point to that at a time where this does get rolled into US law, that WCAG will become the kind of guiding light of that. So we now have kind of a basic understanding of accessibility, and I want to look a little bit at what this looks like in practice. So I'm going to start with the categories of user impairment. And I have a stat here that says 61 million adults in the United States, which is about 26% of adults, live with a disability of some form. While some disabilities are visible, many others are not, such as colorblindness. This is from a CDC study. So when we talk about the categories of user impairment, we start by kind of redefining what disability means. It's no longer looked at as just a personal condition that defines a person's health. It's much more accurate to view a disability as a universal experience stemming from mismatches in human interaction. So to address these mismatches, we really need to start to consider the categories and temporalities of impairment. So there are 4 main categories of impairment, the first being visual, which covers people living with blindness, low vision, people suffering from color blindness. Hearing, which encompasses people living with deafness or who are hard of hearing. Motor, which is anyone suffering from slow response time, limited fine motor controls, someone who might not have the physical ability to use a mouse. And cognitive, which is any person living with a learning disability, someone suffering from distractibility, someone with an inability to remember or focus on large amounts of information. So each one of these categories really requires a deliberate strategy in content design. Oftentimes, these strategies promote usability just in general beyond people with disabilities. So when trying to satisfy the needs of anyone who might fall into one of these categories of impairment, we end up helping a much larger audience just because everybody benefits from helpful illustrations or logically organized content or an intuitive navigation. Similarly, while a user suffering from a disability might benefit from having captions or transcripts, these things are also helpful for anyone who uses multimedia in a silent or a very noisy situation. Which brings me to temporalities. And there are three of these, the first being permanent, which is someone who was born with or lives with a permanent disability. Temporary is someone who is suffering currently from an injury or illness. And then situational is someone who's experiencing something due to their external environmental circumstances at the time. So what I'd like you to consider is three different people: someone born with just one arm, a person suffering from a broken arm, and then a parent that is holding a baby in one arm. Each one of these three people is experiencing the same motor impairment, just within a different temporality at the time. So when I said before more people benefit just by doing these things that help that person living with a permanent disability, by being mindful of this full range of temporality in which a person can experience an impairment, we're just really able to scale our solutions to create something that benefits a much larger audience overall. So in the US, 26,000 people a year suffer from the loss of an upper extremity. When we start to include people within these other temporary impairments or situational impairments, that number grows to be greater than 21 million. So just again, thinking about that larger audience, we're able to now create a much better user experience for close to 21 million people just by considering that person living with a permanent disability. And these stats come from Microsoft's Inclusivity Handbook. So I want to take another look at this guy who we met earlier on in the presentation. On the surface, I know I present as pretty typical. I'm also hyper aware of the fact that as a white male living in my 30s, the world is very accessible to me. It's not lost on me. This, though, doesn't change the fact that I do live with two permanent disabilities, and I have a persistent situational one. I am colorblind, so I have difficulty discerning between blues and greens. I live next to a train track. There is a train about 20 feet to my front, so about once an hour, a train drives by, makes it very hard for me to hear anything that's going on. And I'm nearsighted, so I do struggle seeing at a great distance and wear glasses for that. So again, all of this is to just say that in our efforts to make technology more accessible to people living with disabilities, what we really end up doing is creating a much better experience for all users on the internet or using technology in general. So I want to talk about the POUR principles a little bit, which were those four main principles that I touched on earlier in my slide about WCAG. POUR is an acronym which stands for Perceivable, Operable, Understandable, and Robust. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are organized by these four main principles, the POUR principles. The guidelines state that content must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So for perceivable, what this means is that users are able to identify content and interface components even without the use of all of their senses. An example of this being used successfully is by providing alternative text for any non-decorative images. So I have this little GIF off to the right, and I wrote some alternative text for it that says, "A T-Rex eating French fries in the rain." So even if you are unable to see that image, you now have a pretty good idea of what's going on there, because I've told you that there's a T-Rex in the rain eating some French fries. For operable, what this means is that users can use interface components to navigate the content. For example, by ensuring all content is accessible via keyboard navigation. We do this by making sure that navigatable our components are set out in a logical order so people don't end up having to jump all over the page in a way that is really jarring or confusing. We also create what's called focus states, which really help orient the user as to where they are on the page at that time. While this does benefit people living with motor impairments or cognitive impairments, anyone who's unable to use a mouse or a point and click interface, this is also helpful for a category of users which are referred to as super users. And these are people who prefer to navigate the internet using a keyboard just because it's much faster for them. So again, we're just touching on a wide range of users when we do these things. Understandable. What this means is that users can comprehend the content and the interface. So for example, writing your content at an 8th to 9th grade reading level really ensures everyone can understand the content you're putting out into the world. I am aware that this is not always possible, especially if we're talking about a site that has to include some very technical information, or maybe it's very industry specific jargon. When this is the case, what we do is use things like glossaries and include definitions so that people are still able to understand those words or that jargon. And then robust, what this one means is that content is compatible with different browsers and assistive technologies. So for example, as long as we're ensuring that all markup is valid when we're building the website, we can ensure that that site can be readily interpreted by any type of technology that the user is using. So then, how do we measure success? How do we make sure we're actually accomplishing our goals? As I mentioned earlier, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines breaks their criteria into an A, AA, AAA rating. This gets a little confusing because on its surface, this appears that single A is the worst and AAA is the best, where this isn't actually the case. Every one of those 3 levels actually is compliant. They're just 2 varying degrees. There is actually a new version, a draft version of WCAG 3 in the works right now, where they are re-looking at the way they categorize success to remove that A, AA, AAA rating to make it a little less confusing and more clear. So the way I've broken it out here is what we have to do to hit the mark, how we can give 110%, and then what we can do to go the extra mile. I also want to point out that there is no way to fully automate accessibility. It is a moving target. It's something that's constantly evolving. As I mentioned, WCAG is already in draft for a 3.0 version with a planned release of 2023. So we're even going to see some new regulations come out pretty soon. And then I have a quote on this slide that says, accessible website design is a long-term commitment. It's not a one-time project. And this was a quote by the Bureau of Internet Accessibility. So to hit the mark, things we can do are run our own accessibility audits. That can be as simple as using your own website and seeing if there's any areas of friction, anything that doesn't make sense, looks a little off. You can go through your own website using a keyboard. You can turn on your VoiceOver app and run through the website using VoiceOver or screen reader. Just discussing accessibility concerns internally with other people just keeps it top of mind. It lets you hear those other perspectives. And keeping current with evolving standards just by reading up on anything emerging, doing some Google searches. There's a ton of information out there that you can find. So to go a little extra to hit 110%, you can actually pay an accessibility expert to come in and run an audit on your website and advise your team on how to make improvements, what exactly they see as kind of non-compliance and how you can address those. And then soliciting feedback on your website specific to accessibility is a huge step that you can take. There are a lot of sites nowadays that I'm starting to see include an accessibility statement within their footers alongside their privacy policies. this is something that very simply would just often state that there was an intention to build the site with accessibility in mind, genuinely asking for feedback, saying, we have done everything we can to make this accessible. If you see anything that we have not been successful at, just let us know so we can improve it. And then to go even farther, you can pay for user testing and ensure a wide range of abilities are represented when you do this. There are a lot of services out there that offer this, where they can have people with varying disabilities come in and test your website and provide feedback for you. You can also partner with professional accessibility services or agencies just to provide you with continued education, training, and/or consulting. And then I just want to top line that with, there is no such thing as perfect accessibility. As I mentioned, it is constantly evolving. It is a moving target, but as long as you're working towards it, we're going to do what we can to really ensure the most people can access the content on our sites. So just to wrap everything up, I want to talk about the benefits of having an accessible website. So when you make your website accessible, for starters, probably the most important part of this is that it simply just is the right thing to do. When more people can access your content, it just means more people can participate in your message and what you're putting out into the world. It's also good for business. Most of the practices that provide good accessibility also improve your website's user experience. It also helps improve the SEO of your website. We are also seeing a rise in websites or corporations focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Having an accessible website fits really nicely into these efforts. And then finally, it does ensure compliance. So we should really never be doing these things out of a fear of litigation, but we do want to make sure that we are protecting ourselves, and being compliant does ensure that. I then have a couple resources I want to share. So there are 3 here that I've laid out to help better understand how different people experience the web. So the first is a video link to YouTube for an artist named Christine Sun Kim, who takes a look at captions. She is basically approaching with, captions are not usually well written, so she looks at what makes these captions unsuccessful and how to successfully write captions for people that are actually helpful. The second video is a link to YouTube again for this woman named Christy Veers. She is a blind woman who is going through her phone using VoiceOver to show how a blind person interfaces with a phone using VoiceOver. And then this third resource is, again, another link to YouTube. And it's a man named Renee Wan going through how a blind person navigates with a PDF file. So these are just 3 really nice resources to get you in that mindset of seeing how other people are experiencing or interacting with technology. Then to continue your learning efforts, there's a great book by Kat Holmes called Mismatch, which just talks about inclusion. There's a link here to purchase her book. Stark has, which is a accessibility contrast plugin that started for Figma and Sketch. They also have a massive resource of accessibility, or a massive collection of accessibility resources on their website. It's all super helpful. It's very well curated. And then Equalize Digital puts on this incredible WordPress accessibility meetup bi-monthly. I recommend checking it out. You can check out their upcoming speakers at the link on the slide. And then just some of the more technical standards and checklists I went over in this presentation. There is a link here to the WCAG 2.2 guidelines. There is also a link to the draft 3.0 guidelines. There are some, on the right-hand side here, some checklists put out by WCAG just to go through and see that, like, test yourself if your site is successful. There are some helpful articles put out and resources by WCAG. I linked also a couple quick reference guides that simplify the guidelines a little bit and make it a little easier to go through. And then I've linked Microsoft's inclusion design or inclusive design standards here too. It's just a really well put together document that is super helpful. And then thank you all for listening to my presentation. Are there any questions at all?
Yes. So that was really great. So I have a question before I get to some of the questions people have posted, and feel free everyone to put them in the Q&A box and then we'll go through them. But I'm curious, when do you give this presentation to your clients? Like when in the sales process or the onboarding process, when does that happen?
So it happens post sales process, usually pretty early in our web process. It'll usually come from one of two situations. One, either we're doing something that is getting a lot of pushback, and we're like, well, we're doing this for accessible reasons. The client will say, what does that even mean? And we're like, well, we can educate you on that. We're actually seeing a lot more often people do already know what accessibility is on some level. So we're starting to get questions very early on in our process that are, well, is this going to be accessible when you make the site? Or like, what are you doing to make the site accessible? And then we can say, well, actually, a lot. If you'd like some more information, we can schedule some time with you or your team. We also do get some of our larger clients who have legal departments really want to know this information. So we'll have this kind of presentation with them, and then they're very interested in those extended resources to look into cases and read up on other more technical stuff.
So it ends up sort of being more of a like on demand, you can just provide this as like a webinar for them versus as part of your onboarding process, everyone gets this. Is that kind of right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. It's not every client gets it. But yeah, on demand is probably the way to best describe it.
I think that's great. Do you, and are there extra things that you're doing during the sales process to talk about accessibility, or is it not really come up? Because I know you said you're just kind of making everything accessible from the get-go as much as possible. So maybe you don't have to sell them during the sales process on the pricing. But
we included in our scope that the work we do will be accessible. Like I said too, though, it's not really something that we allow people to opt out of, which we did have a lot of discussion early on as whether we want it to be its own line item. And then we realized that that could get murky because someone could very easily say, well, what's this? Cut that out. I don't want to pay for that. So we've kind of just rolled it into the greater price of the project and made it.
yeah, so it's like you think about everything for accessibility and you do in design, you just add that to the design fee, and that's just the design fee, that sort of thing. And then
Yep.
dev and everything.
Yep, 100% right.
Yeah. Okay, so there were a few questions that came into the Q&A. So let me pull them up. I'm going to kind of go, so they're going to go back to the beginning. So someone said, from what I understand, the Duckworth bill does not include WCAG as guidelines to use. Is that correct?
That is correct. So all the bill says is that once it passes, hopefully it will pass, it puts a time constraint on the Department of Justice to lay out regulation. I believe it gives them 6 months to write that regulation. A lot of people are saying they're probably just going to use WCAG simply because it's already the requirement under Section 508. It's already being used by a lot of other countries. It's just going to make the most sense. It's something that already exists. They would roll it in. Also, that stipulation that it needs to update every 3 years really also goes hand in hand with how often WCAG updates. It allows them to just pull in the newest version whenever it comes out. So while, yes, it's not included as the guideline to use, there are a lot of people who think that there's a good chance it will just become the guideline. But
okay.
I guess we won't know until it actually happens. So we'll just keep hoping.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. There's probably a good chance considering Section 508 does, and that seems to be the standard on most laws internationally. But of
Mhm.
course, we get a curveball.
Oh yeah, I could go and do something completely different. I believe actually that India has its own. I actually was ready for this. Yeah, so nope, India uses it. There was someone. Japan uses the International Organization of Standardization Guidelines 71 rather than WCAG. So there is another one out there, but almost everyone else who has compliance rolled into their laws uses WCAG.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, so another question, Jean asked, federal agencies are required to have accessible websites. What about other government sites, state, county, other municipality type of sites?
I believe that is included under those federal agencies.
So my
Not 100%.
understanding is that if they get federal funding,
So that's actually, yeah, so that's in section
that-
504, I
Mhm.
believe, of the same act. Yeah. That requires them to be compliant, but I don't think it mentions WCAG.
Mhm.
Yeah, 504 requires recipients of federal government aid and assistance to provide for accessibility, including websites, but it doesn't mention WCAG as conformance.
Mhm. And I think the ADA would apply to this as well. State
Yeah.
websites or county websites, those
Mhm.
sorts of things.
Yeah.
Linda asks, as someone with color blindness, which is easier for you to read, black text on a white background or white text on a black background? Is there any text that is difficult to read due to its decorative properties?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually don't experience much difficulty reading. Really, the only time my color blindness comes in is really light yellows or greens or really dark blues or purples. And at that, it's just that I see the wrong color. So if they're next to each other, like if you're denoting a system maybe that uses yellow and green in a key, I might not be able to tell the difference between that yellow and that green. It all look the same to me.
Like on a
Or if
chart?
you, correct. Yeah, so if it was like this bar, like green represents this and yellow represents this, and then I look at the chart and I'm like, well, there's just two greens. I don't know which one you're talking about. Or if there's like difficult colors overlaid on top of each other, it's hard for me to read, but the fonts themselves never bother me, and black and white haven't really been a problem. But thank you for asking. It's a thoughtful question.
Yeah, I think on that note,
I
that's why there's that guideline about not using color alone, right? So on a
Yes,
chart like
exactly.
that, one should be solid and green and the other one could be striped and yellow. And then that would handle it for you because you know it's a striped versus a solid or something.
As long as it's not yellow and green stripes, because then that's just solid color again.
Oh, that's a good point. So does color contrast probably comes in a little bit on the color blindness as well, then I would think.
I am so good at just recognizing contrast failures with my eyes because of it, where I'll see something and just immediately go, that doesn't pass, and it won't.
You don't even need to use the eyedropper.
I have the built-in checker right here. But that's good. I'd be curious if anyone else struggles with white or black text and background combinations.
Yeah, if you do, feel free to put that in the chat and share your thoughts and we can share them out with the group. I think the other thing that I find interesting about that, and I'm curious on that note, is when you have that slide and you're telling your clients, oh, hey, this is me. Like you might look at me and think I'm just a typical white man that has no problems on the web, but surprise, there are things that come in. How do your clients react to that? And do you think that's helpful?
It gives me a little bit extra, I think, what's the word I'm looking for? Like authority, I guess, in it, where I can say, well, I can't see this. So clearly it's a failure. They're usually pretty receptive to it. What happens more often than not is someone just ends up telling me their brother or uncle is also colorblind.
Oh, and then they're like, oh yeah, I've heard of that too.
Yeah,
I know someone.
yeah, my dad's the same way. I usually get so. But yeah, they're always very open to it, and it does help me with that, having the little extra. Well, I can't see it, so I know it's wrong.
Yeah. I think having real people and being able to put a real face on anything when you're trying to sell something or explain is really helpful.
Right, it becomes more personal that way.
Someone asked content accessibility. A website is accessible, but the content uploaded by the client is not, usually PDFs, or they have useless alt text. How would you address that?
We have it built in to our contracts, actually, that we are responsible for work we do, and they're responsible for work they do. So if they're not paying us to create the PDFs or update their website, if they're making the updates themselves, we can't ensure what they're doing is accessible. We can do as much as we can to educate them, but ultimately, if they're going to go practice bad habits, there's not much we can do about it. And we do protect ourselves in our contracts with that.
Yeah, I think we do something very similar, because we're even like, if we're importing in 70,000 products of a spreadsheet, right? And so we're always like, if we didn't build it or enter the content, or you didn't pay us to audit it, then we won't guarantee. And I think when you're first starting out, that's a good distinction, is you're never telling someone you're going to deliver them a 100% accessible website. You're just saying the components that you work on will be accessible. But if you didn't work on it, how do you know?
That even gets murky too if the client's writing their own content. Like, we will go through and fix heading structure and things like that when we input it, but as soon as we pass the site over to them, there's nothing we can do to stop them from putting an H1 in the middle of the page with an H6 under it. Half the time they don't even know they've made an edit.
You got to give them our plugin.
Yeah. You put your plugin on all our sites, if they use it.
Yeah, I know. We can only do so much, right? Yeah. So they're like, oh, this is red. Anyway, publish.
There's a lot of errors on this site. Can you look into this for me? Yes.
Extra recurring revenue when you fix all their stuff. Linda said, I recently checked one of my websites that I created with accessibility intentions throughout the build. I checked it with the Google Chrome developer tools, and it gave me a score of 99 on accessibility. How much should I trust this tool for scoring?
Oh boy. A little bit, a lot of it. It's hard. Anything that automates testing is always take with a grain of salt. If you're getting a 99, that's pretty good. That means technically your site is sound. Really, though, what helps is actually going through it with a human eye. For instance, an automated tester can only do so much as check if an image has alternate text. It can't actually discern whether that's helpful text or not. So if you write an article about, I don't know, something like cats are reading newspapers now, and you have an image of a cat reading a newspaper and the text just says like pet or like black cat, that doesn't really correlate to the content in a way that's helpful. So while it would pass an automated tester, it doesn't actually pass someone who needs that alternate text to understand the content. So yeah, any automated test is good. It should be part of your testing process, but then you should also be going through it and just seeing what does or doesn't make sense actually for a user.
Yeah, I know one thing that I know we haven't figured out how to automate for, but we catch a lot of times is like when things are out of order. Like the tab order doesn't match the visual order because the developer has like put something and then they've used Flex to reverse the order of the elements or things like that. And so I feel like you really do just have to tab through it and turn on a screen reader and listen to it and all that.
Yeah, because there's a lot of stuff. Even with contrast, which is so easily checkable with an equation, sometimes something could pass and still be hard to read. And the only way you know that is if you look at it.
I think color contrast is one of the hardest things actually to test with an automated tool accurately, because there's so many times where the contrast, like the color of the text is on one element and the background is 5 different, 5 elements above or something like that. Or if you have text that's over a background image, you actually need to test the lightest point in that background image. Whereas a contrast checker is actually only going to test the color behind the image.
It just looks at the background.
That's not even visible. Or it would be visible if the image didn't load, but I feel like that's like one of the ones I don't even trust. And so we use Axe internally too, in addition to ours. And like, I feel like I'll run Axe on a website and it'll be like, there are 75 color. It's like everything. They're just like, no, human needs to look at it. Human needs to look at it like every time.
Right.
They're like, we can't tell.
There's a lot of stuff too, I think, that passes, and I look at it and I'm like, how did this pass? It's so hard.
Yeah. Dinib said, following up on Linda's question, some people have trouble when there's too much contrast, so black and white or black on white doesn't work very well. What's the best way to negotiate these factors?
So we use off whites and off blacks. So we try to avoid true black and true white when we can. So we don't really ever use like 000 black. We'll use maybe 333. So it's a little bit of a dark gray. And then whites, you can do like a FA. I'm getting a little too technical with hex colors, but there are a lot of articles where if you just look up dark mode contrast, user experience, something like that, there's a lot of people who write out the best contrast ratios for blacks and whites that aren't true black and white, because it does really put a strain on the eye to look at something that highly contrasted.
Awesome. Let's see. Jonathan said, when you're putting in a sales process bid with the client and the client does not want their site remade, how can we sell accessibility to improve their current site's accessibility? Do you have any tips on that?
Oh, maybe this is a little extra, but we kind of avoid maintaining any site we didn't build, and we just almost blanket that answer. If we didn't build it, we don't want anything to do with it. Like, because you get down this tricky road of like you're shouldering now the responsibility of someone else's failings, and just the nature of development. There's a million ways to do everything, and then it's like I have no idea how they did this or how I'm going to rebuild this without ripping everything apart. So it just can become this whole extra, I don't know, snowball effect. But what we do sometimes is we actually just worked with a client where we ran an accessibility audit on their existing site, provided recommendations, and provided costs for how we could update that site. They decided to just take their site down entirely. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that wasn't like super vital to their business then.
Like, we'll just get rid of the site then, I guess. Like, okay.
Yeah, sometimes it is better to rebuild, but so we do remediations on websites that we didn't build. We almost exclusively do them on a retainer-based process, and we give them a minimum months to accessible, but we don't ever tell them maximum. So we're like, because it's so hard, and something could take 5 minutes to fix, or it could take 16 hours, right? If we're like, okay, now we need to rebuild this entire really complex thing, or more than that even, right?
A lot of stuff it's a markup failure. You're like, well, I have nothing else I can do except rebuild the entire structure of this website now, which also becomes very expensive for the client then.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's hard about that too is like we've had some where we're like, we're gonna redo this, and then it can snowball into, oh, well, if we're rebuilding this structure, this element, maybe we also should like try to improve the right, like let's not just fix the accessibility, let's fix the performance, which is fine, I think, as long as they have the budget. And so I think that's where being really clear about what the expectations are with the clients, and I think like if somebody has, I don't know, sub $10,000, like under $10,000, then depending upon, unless it's a very small basic brochure website, like it may be challenging to get 100% compliant. It could be better though. And that's what we talk to them about, is like progress. And like, can we, maybe we can do some now and then next year we'll do more, or, next quarter or something like that. And try to like create the idea that it's an ongoing thing is something that we do.
That's a great point too, because there is also the thing that I know courts will look at your openness to bring your site to compliance as showing like if you're progressing towards it and you're doing what you can already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not a lawyer. You're not a lawyer. We're not giving legal advice, but I think that's something I've heard from attorneys. So it's like
some cases where that's been the ruling of like, you're clearly taking steps.
So if they can document, this is what we invested, these are the fixes that we made, this is our timeline and our plan on continuing to make fixes, I think that is helpful if they do get sued or if they've been sued already.
So. I'm realizing, Jonathan said, how can we sell accessibility? So I think you can use some of the arguments I made where it was like, it's right to do it. It makes it better overall for your business because it's easier to drive traffic to your site if everything makes sense. And then you do always have the nuclear argument of, well, it's illegal, which you don't really ever want to pull out right from the start, because we try not to villainize people living with disabilities as like they're just going to go after and sue you, but it is a legal requirement at the end of the day. So like they are breaking the law if their site isn't accessible, which can be a good selling tactic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find I don't know if you've had this experience, but I feel like the clients who are most motivated by the legal fear are the less likely to really get behind it. And it's the clients that are more motivated by our corporate values, or we know we have a lot of people in our audience, like a nonprofit that serves people with disabilities, or like those people are the ones that are more likely to invest a lot of money into it. I think like the fear-based people are like, what's the shortcut I can take?
Right, because those people just want to hit that, well, what measures compliance? And then the latter group says,
And do the minimum.
Yeah, how do we actually make our site accessible?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Eric asks, in the sales process, talking to prospects, are there any specific red flags you've identified or things you hear from customers that make you adjust the sales process or pass on the customer? Something like when they lead with cost, it's always an issue, or something else like that.
I might not be the best to answer this because I'm not really involved in that early stage of our sales process. I'm sure there are a ton of red flags. Sometimes I'll get asked to like maybe look at a proposal or something, and a lot of the red flags are when you can just tell the person is saying buzzwords but doesn't really understand what they're talking about, and you're like, well, what are you actually asking for here? But we have a pretty fluid sales process that is very conversational, so there's a lot of back and forth to build up to an actual sale. So we're able to address any red flags or pull in people we need to have conversations in those like pitch processes. I hope that answered well. I'm not really the salesperson, so.
Yeah, I'm on the same boat. I don't do sales. I'm like, here, go talk to my partner. So I'm sure he weeds people out all the time.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot I probably don't hear about.
Yeah, I think sometimes for us, one of the things that we get careful about is people coming to us and they are in the midst of a lawsuit. So then we have to have a lot of questions like, have they like reached a settlement yet? Are they trying to, like, I think we don't like as much the ones that are like, how can I just get this dismissed, Yeah. So, I mean, we're always like, if you haven't talked to an attorney yet, you got to go talk to an attorney. Because sometimes I know that we've had people reach out. They're like, I got a letter. And we're like, okay, but we're not a law firm. You know that, right? Like, so we're like, go talk to an attorney first. And we can tell you about our services and everything, but like, that may not solve your problem.
Yeah, I think we have a disclaimer that it basically says like, we're not lawyers. Like, do not expect us to give you legal compliance. Like, we're making your site accessible the way we know how to, but we are not a legal firm in any sense of the word.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure our lawyer had us put that in our terms of service. We are not a law firm. We do not practice law. But because I feel like that comes up a lot in accessibility more than it did before. Like, I don't remember having scenarios like that. Maybe it comes up with privacy these days too, but I feel like getting into accessibility, I hear questions where it makes me feel like they don't realize that we can't answer those.
Yeah, we luckily don't get too many. There was one client we had who, in the middle of doing a accessibility audit on their site, they got a letter from a law firm. So then all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is much more serious of a project. And then we had to talk to their internal legal team, and their lawyers were asking me questions. And I was like, I'm not a legal expert. I can point you in the right direction, but I don't take what I'm saying as law.
Yeah. So I do know that in Chris's, my partner Chris, in his initial conversations, he asks them where they're located and if they have any offices or nexus in any, like he'll ask about California, New York, he'll ask about Ontario, because we're in the US, so we get a fair bit of that kind of stuff. So it's like, we always want to know. So he'll ask that. He'll ask if they get federal funding, if they get any federal grants. So I know he asks like all these kind of red flag type questions, which don't necessarily mean we won't work with them, but it might change some of our recommendations to them. If we know they're in a certain area or they're getting federal funding, that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, if anyone else has red flags, I would be super interested. Throw them up in the chat. So everybody can see them, because I know you got two people that don't manage the sales process. It's kind of funny. Let's see. Beverly asked, why aren't developers developing with accessibility in mind? Why does it need to be an add-on for an additional charge? Do you have thoughts about that?
Short answer is there's just a lot of bad developers out there, and people who don't even understand or know accessibility exists. Like I mentioned, we don't treat it as an add-on or additional. It just is our process. You get a website from us for developing accessibly. Unfortunately, the barrier to entry to be a developer is very low, especially with WordPress and the amount of themes that exist. Anyone can log in, make a WordPress.com account, and throw a theme up and have no idea what they're doing. Yeah, I think it's just there's too many bad developers or people who don't pay attention to or even know about accessibility.
Yeah, so Isla said in the chat, developers can find it very hard to change their process. So I'm guessing that means her company finds nurturing them and educating them really helps. So I think that is true. When people have had a certain things and they aren't used to, keyboard testing or running a scanning tool, and figuring out how to fit that in the beginning could be challenging. Let's see, Glenn says most developers don't intentionally create inaccessible content. It's more about education. So I think that's along the same line. And Mike said, it takes a lot of education on precisely understanding the question of accessibility, and developing with accessibility in mind is another pair of shoes.
Yeah.
I think, so I will say, I don't know if it's just on developers. So when we first started doing accessibility under our previous company name, we would frequently have extra accessibility as an option. And it was because in the beginning, we were building, if you're building like a $10,000 website, you're probably using templates or starter themes. You're not custom doing everything, and you're probably relying on a lot of plugin. And I do know that's some feedback or some challenges that I've seen, like some of the people. So we have some agencies that we consult for, or they have us audit their stuff. And there've been a few where they're using out of the box themes or block libraries. And I don't know if it's not just because they don't care. I mean, obviously they're coming to us right. But I think that is definitely a challenge. On two fronts. One is that when you're used to doing that, you do have to dramatically increase your prices to account for accessibility. So if your baseline price is $5,000, you probably can't build an accessible website because, and I've heard someone be like, I committed to accessible on this and I'm losing money on this project because I'm spending so much time fixing things I never imagined I'd have to fix. So the bottom answer to almost every agency problem is raise your prices. But I will say, like, that is why I think some people do it as an add-on, because they're afraid to be like, my base price is $30,000 or $20,000 or whatever that would be for you, right?
Yeah.
And so they're like, my base price is 10. And if you want accessibility, it's going to be 20 because I'm going to have to do all this extra work that I don't normally do. So I think there's this, like, you have to find the point where you feel confident enough in just, this is what we do.
Mhm.
And our base starts at this because this is so important. We're not going to leave it out. But I know also there's like, does your sales pipeline support that? Does your marketing and branding support that? Like, there's a lot that goes into getting to that point.
I think there's also a little bit of a misunderstanding too, where accessibility is a development thing, where parts of it are. There's a lot of accessibility that comes in during the design phase, and there's a lot of accessibility that comes in during content writing. So you have to really start at the very beginning with, is my content accessible? And then is my design accessible? And then it's, is my development accessible? So you can't really, because we do also get clients who are like, well, you'll just make this accessible in development, right? And you're like, it's not really how it works. You have to start that way. So we've done a lot of work internally, like getting every team on board with accessibility, to the point now where even our print branding designers include accessibility guidelines in their brand guidelines for how to use their brand. Like, these colors don't go together, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It really is so much more than just the development. You have to be constantly thinking about it throughout the entire process. And then honestly, I think, so we do custom build all our sites. The development aspect of it is probably the easiest, just because the
You have a
markup,
starter you're using. Yeah.
it's logical markup already. We're custom building our plugins. We're using the right roles and labels and all that stuff. So it's, at that point, it's just pretty easy. If it was designed accessibly, it's going to be fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's really starting it earlier in the process. Mm-hmm. Charles said, you touched on situations with really technical subject matter. I have a couple of clients in that situation. We write the homepage for a general audience, but other technical minded pages are written at a high level. Aside from rewriting, do you have other recommendations to keep it technical but improve accessibility? Are rollover type tooltips accessible to screen readers or keyboard?
So yes, I believe the actual WCAG requirement is that you have to define an uncommon word in its first instance on every page, something like that. But we actually do have a rollover type tooltip plugin we developed that is accessible. So it does work with keyboards and screen readers. You can tab to them, it opens the box, and then you're able to tab away and close the box.
Is it on WordPress.org?
It's not that nice. So it's,
Is it on your GitHub? I'm like, I want to find it now. This sounds cool.
It's still pretty manual, so like it's easy for me to use as a developer. I don't know if it's ready for
Mass sharing.
but it
All
is.
right, this is your 2023 goal. We all want your tooltip plugin.
Yeah, it leverages. There's a really good jQuery library that it leverages called tooltipper.js.
Okay.
If anyone looks it up, they're very in-depth documentation on it, and you have a lot of flexibility with how you use it. So we kind of turn that into a little glossary tooltip plugin. But yeah, it works with keyboard. So when you tab, it opens, it leaves the definition opened if you mouse away from it. So it works on mobile, and it works if the keyboard user and screen readers can read it because it's actually inline content. I think it wraps it in a span or a div within the content. I can't remember exactly the markup off the top of my head, but yeah.
That's cool.
That's what we did.
Yeah, I think like I've tested Wikipedia's
Wikipedia
tooltip
is
and
like
definitions with
my
keyboard.
accessible website.
Yeah. I mean, those work pretty well.
Yeah.
So, it is possible. I think that's a good solution. The other one is the simplified summary. So if you're going for AAA, and we have a few like government clients that are doing this, if it's a page that needs really detailed, it really like dense text, it's not going to be 8th grade or 9th grade, it's going to be much higher. You can put a blurb, and I think the best website that has examples of this is Lainey Feingold's website. If you look even on the bottom of her homepage or on every blog post, there is a plain language alternative version that summarizes the page or the post, and it's written for much lower reading level. So I think her website has a great example of how you can do that. And obviously she's writing, if you're not familiar with her, she's a lawyer in the disability rights space. So she's writing about laws, right, and legal cases and all that kind of stuff. So
I think that's exactly what the requirement is too. It's not that all of your content has to be at that level. It's that you just have to provide
an alternative
for people. Yeah.
Someone asked, it just says anonymous attendee. Do you give the client a guarantee that the website is compliant? How do you protect yourself if your client gets sued so that they can't turn around and point the finger at you?
Like I said, we do have a disclaimer. I wish I could remember it off the top of my head, but it is basically like, we're doing our best efforts to bring your site to compliance, to make it accessible. We don't guarantee 100% compliance. That's not something that's possible even. And then just mentioning again, like, we are not legal experts. I don't even have like an ICAPP certification. So it's just like, we're doing what we can for you to go as far as we can, but there's no really like true guarantee. It's hard to even promise 100% compliance just because it's not even possible to hit. Which I know I mentioned before, I probably should expand on it, but it's difficult because something that's compliant to one person can be incompliant to another person, even someone who shares a disability. So it's like, it's not even a goal that is attainable. You're just trying to capture the most amount of people as you can. But yeah, so I guess we protect ourselves just with disclaimers in our contracts.
And then I'm assuming you probably have like liability insurance, right?
Oh.
Errors and omissions.
I hope so.
Yeah, so we have errors and omissions, which also covers our accessibility checker plugin because we got nervous about that, right? And then we have something in our contract which is pretty common, that we are never liable for more than what the client has paid us in the past year. So even if we're going to make a claim on our insurance, they're only going to get back what they paid us. They're not going to get $2 million or something like that.
That's interesting.
Yeah. This is why it pays to hire an attorney to write your contracts and not just go use some like contract builder on the web, right? freecontracts.com or something. I don't know if that's a real website, but like, yeah, because they're like, here's things that you should have. Yeah. So, Eamon wants to know, Eamon said how, but I don't know. It said, how do you convince clients not to use accordions? And what do you suggest as alternatives? But I'm curious, first of all, do you recommend against accordions?
In certain situations, I do. So I'm very big on that. Components were made for specific use cases, and as soon as you start using them for what they were not intended for is when you run into trouble. So a lot of times what I see, especially from new designers or people who aren't as familiar designing for the web, they'll go, I have all of this content, I don't know what to do with it, I'm just going to throw it in an accordion to hide it. That's a bad use of an accordion. If though you have a section of your website, maybe these are features we offer, you have 20 features, each feature has a description, that could be a good use for an accordion. You give your user that ability to quickly parse through the information, find what they want to find, and only get what they're looking for. They don't need to intake all of the information, so there's no reason to expose it all. So there are proper use cases, there are improper use cases. We try to avoid the improper uses at all times. To make them accessible, it's actually one of my favorite things, which is probably nerdy, is like challenging myself to take these components that are sometimes very inaccessible and make them accessible by adding correct markup, making sure roles change. There is a great website called inclusive-components.design that I reference frequently. They have things like making cards, data tables, modals, sliders, accordions, toggles, how to do those things in an accessible way. And they'll give you actual examples of markup. So it's a great starting point. Thank you, Paula.
Yeah, we reference the US Web Design Standards website a lot for components too. I think it's helpful. Yeah. Okay, so we're at 11:31. We have a little bit of a buffer with our captioner, but I don't know. I don't want to take advantage if you need to hop off. There are a few more questions, but tell me what you think, Ryan.
Oh, I'm great.
All right. So we're gonna see if we can power through these really fast. So this is like your lightning round. All right. How do you educate clients on the downsides to overlays and cheap fixes?
Oh man, overlays are one of the things I keep it out of my presentation because I could talk an entire hour about how bad overlays are. But it's always that they are a Band-Aid solution at best. At worst, they're worse than doing nothing. Like half the time your site's more accessible without an overlay. But I'll end up, I have an entire note in my notes app that's just like, here's all of the court cases and major media coverage of why you should never use an overlay, why it's bad. Here's petitions by people who are disabled to just stop using them. So I'll compile an email and just be like, here's all the reasons why you should not do it.
And here's references.
Yeah, here's references. Yeah, here's all my sources. So it's, while it seems on the surface like, oh, I can just slap this on my website, you're not actually doing anything. And if anything, you're hurting yourself, because there have been quite a few legal cases in this past year where courts have said, you use an accessibility overlay that shows me that you are not compliant, so you've lost this case. So they're even looking at it now as the use of a widget or an overlay shows non-compliance.
And that they were aware of non-compliance.
Right, which is interesting.
Yeah. Okay, Gary asked, how do you communicate that automated testing tools may have a place but are only part of the process, both to staff who think that these tools are the be all and end all? How do you, said, quote, smack them upside the head to see that such tools are only part of the picture?
It just goes back to education. So we will get sometimes emails from a client who discovered the Google testing tools or Axe or Lighthouse, and they're just like, oh, I ran it through and it failed for these 4 things or these 5 things. And then we have to explain to them, like, yes, those images have no alt text. It's because they're decorative only. That was done intentionally. It's failing because it's a system that doesn't know that. And then we just mention, like, we do a lot of actual human testing too, to make sure that these things work. So it's just that education that this is a part of it. It's important to do. It gives you kind of a baseline to say, here's some really technical failings I've made that I can address very easily. It's kind of the low-hanging fruit. And then we just mentioned, like, we go through with the keyboard, we read it with a screen reader. So
and on the staff side, it's probably just like having good operating procedures and docs, right?
Mm-hmm.
That are like, this is, you have to use a keyboard first, and I'm going to know if you didn't, because I'm going to see if I find it in my testing that this thing is out of order or not missing a focus state, then I'm going to know you didn't do it.
It's really interesting. We just we got a new client not too long ago, and they had a subsidy website from like a company they had acquired, and we were talking to the CEO of that company, and he brought up accessibility, and he was like, it's very important to us. We actually have a full-time accessibility agency on retainer. I was like, oh, cool. I went to the site and immediately tried to tab through it. I got to the logo, the first menu item, the second menu item. The third menu item had a caret indicating a dropdown, but the tab didn't open the caret. It didn't open the dropdown, couldn't open it with a down arrow, couldn't open it with a space bar. So I was like, what is this agency doing? I found you can't open your menu in 3 clicks. And then they had a search icon at the end. So I went to it. Enter opened the search, but it didn't move focus into the search modal. So I was just like trapped on the page still.
But you could see the modal open.
Yeah, so I had to tab through the entire page content, and it was like at the bottom of the DOM. So it was like, they missed 2 major problems in the header.
That's something that I know Chris will tell in some of his sales conversations. But he's like, when you're deciding who to work with, like he'll tell clients this, when you're deciding who to work with, if they tell you they know accessibility or that they do it or it's their specialty, like go tab through their website.
Yes,
Like it's not that hard to figure out if they know what they're talking about or not. So yeah. Let's see. Mike wants to know, do you use, or what do you think about tools like Sim Daltonism, which is a desktop color contrast checker? And I'm not familiar with that. Do you have any opinions on that one?
I'm not familiar with that either. I use Stark's like Chrome extension. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's Daltonism.
Yeah, I don't typically use desktop because I feel like we're using Stark in Figma.
Yeah.
Or we're using a browser extension to do it.
Same.
Yeah. Charles said, do you build sites with a page builder, the block editor, or a custom theme?
So all our themes are custom built, and then we use the Elementor page builder just to make it easier for clients to manage their own content. So we usually pass sites off to clients. We do continued technical maintenance, but they take ownership of their content. So we always use a page builder so they're able to actually go in and manage their content themselves.
Is Elementor only managing then like the content area and the header and footer come out of the theme?
Correct.
So you're not using like Hello Elementor.
No. The downside with Elementor is they add a ton of markup, as any page builder does. But they've done a lot over the past 2 years to really up their accessibility efforts, which I really appreciate. But so that's the page builder we use, and then all our themes are custom built.
So I think we're gonna have you come back and give a talk about, or have someone from your team give a talk about like do's and don'ts for accessibility in Elementor, because I think a lot of people would probably be interested in that.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Let's see. Someone wanted to know, is there a good resource for learning the ropes on accessibility overall in a practical manner? I find the guidelines difficult to apply to what I'm doing in the back end of WordPress.
Oh, there's this fantastic plugin put out by this agency called Equalize Digital that really lays out everything in the back end. No, it really is a great plugin. But so the Stark resources I had in my my presentation, it used to be, I think it was ally.com they bought, or accessible.com, I can't remember. They were a great starting point. They have really good kind of like overview articles that break down the guidelines into plain language. Actually, I probably have it bookmarked. I can drop it in real quick. I can't find it.
Yeah, I'll chime in that excuse me, the Ally Collective, it's A11Y Collective, has a lot of they have training videos that are super good on learning accessibility, and I recommend those a lot. I haven't taken them, but I know a lot of people say that they're really helpful, and I know Rianne, who helped to make that, and she definitely knows what she's talking about. I think we have time for a last question, and I'm having to pick, but Ryan, before I ask you the last question, if people want to follow up with you, because there won't be questions we're going to get to, what's the best way for someone to get a hold of you?
You can just drop me an email. I'll put my email in the chat now.
And are you on any of the socials these days?
LinkedIn
LinkedIn or Twitter, or
LinkedIn,
somewhere random that is getting more attention?
Um, I'm becoming a little more active on LinkedIn. So,
Okay.
oh, I did want to mention about learning resources. You reminded me. Google has a free accessibility course on Udacity that's really good. It's maybe 2 or 3 years old now, but it's free. It covers a lot. Their accessibility expert over there is a blind user, so he's very insightful. It was a quick class. I think it's only 8 hours. I went through it. It's pretty easy.
Awesome. So let's see, I'm debating, you can pick. So we've got one about when you raise your prices to cover accessibility, how do you compete with lowball competitors? And we also have one about how would you work with a client who's operating under misinformation about accessibility? So what looks like the best question for you? Why don't you answer it?
Oh boy. Maybe the misinformation one.
Okay.
So that's really where this presentation I just gave comes in. So it's all about how do we properly educate on what we're talking about, what the world's talking about, how we're supposed to address accessibility, why it's important, why we need to use it. So that's where we really use this resource. I can quickly say with lowball offers, we just let them fall away. It's kind of like, you don't want to pay for our service, you don't want our service. That's just a huge red flag.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't be the right client anyway. Yeah. So, well, thank you so much. And thank you for the extra time answering all of the questions. Thanks you everyone for the phenomenal questions. As a reminder, this meetup was recorded and we will have the recording up with accurate captions and a full transcript in about 2 weeks on equalizedigital.com/meetup. We're going to say thank you, wave goodbye, and we're going to sit here quietly for a minute. Feel free to hop off, everyone, but I need to wait to make sure that the transcript gets fully updated so that people who are reading the transcript don't get cut off at the end. So thank you so much, Ryan.
Of course, it was very fun. I would stay all day and answer questions, but I do have clients knocking on the door. So thanks for having me. Thanks guys for listening and coming out.
Yep, thank you.